The only way you'll get people to convince people to keep doing that is if you convince them that you normalize it. You say this kind of interpersonal um, activity that would be very, very inappropriate in any social group for any social reason. Oh no, that's okay. That's how we do it. And so you get people basically now you are moving into weird toxic spaces that all the anti-role playing people historically who thought it was Satanism or whatever it is, they were completely foolish about that. They had no idea what sort of things did happen inside the culture that actually weren't all that good. So we have sort of given that history, we have a bad history. We have people maintaining behaviors inside the hobby that are actually not very good behaviors at all toward one another. And then when you criticize that, they say, oh, they identify you with like these anti-role playing people who've tried to shut the hobby down. So being in that situation is kind of important to you would recognize that this is one of the reasons why I've had a great deal of trouble communicating with people about this. There's resistance hitting from all sorts of different directions. People are very defensive about the standard behavior, the most common behaviors in the hobby, because they think they're protecting the hobby, for example. So there's also the matter of commerce. If you're captured by commerce, you're going to defend yourself. If you've put in all that money toward, all of those supplements for Exalted or for, or time, if you spend all this time on Reddit, praising Dungeon World, blah, 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 you've put capital into this and you're going to defend that when you think somebody is picking on it. So to get back
I see
to
what you mean.
the actual Lines and Veils stuff, I actually do think that it is not merely, you're right that it's obvious that this is something that we observe for content of any kind of getting together and having fun together. But it is also distinct for role playing. I actually do think that there are interesting risks involved. There is a state of vulnerability. There is a state of having invested in the fiction so far and then finding it going places that you don't actually want. Let me emphasize that I am not just talking about hurt. I am also talking about for any reason. And that's why I emphasized that earlier, that for some reason everybody jumped on the idea of, oh no, hurt people at the table. I've already identified where I think that comes from. Hurting people at the table comes from the bad actors at the larger social sense. But now let's go ahead and say here in this space with people that perhaps we don't know very well, but we're finding that we all have kind of the enough commonality that we can continue to play, and we do so. And then content becomes different from what I'm wanting to have in here. Now, that's very different from saying the story's going where I don't want it to. Stories do that. This fiction is being created. I'm talking about aspects of the content or aspects of the thematics or aspects of the commentary that are not working for me. In other words, this is primarily, and it can be a primarily aesthetic. This is very different. I'm saying to people, I don't think you're doing a very good job. I think you're taking the cheap route. I think you're doing jump scares. I think you're doing just cheap tropes. I think you're, trying to be edgy. You're trying to be an edgelord. Or I think you're being gross and adolescent. Excuse me, I'm 58. Or let's back it up. I'm 48, 10 years ago. Let's back it up. I'm 38, 20 years ago. Do you really think I want to listen to you suddenly, chuckling over something basically stupid and adolescent? No, I don't. Not even 20 years ago. It's not about me being hurt. They can say, oh, I'm sorry you're offended. I'm not offended. You're just a fucking idiot. Or even if you're not a fucking idiot, you made a judgment call there that I don't like. Not liking your judgment there. And I think it makes a lot of sense at the level of aesthetics, because you see, we're no longer talking about the rules. They may have been very appropriate in terms of their use of those authorities. But now I'm talking about an aesthetic judgment, which is this shit is not good. And yeah, we're all sitting here at the table and we all have at least some bottom level, some drop off point in which we don't think that's good. And we don't even have to agree. We all have different ones. Maybe we should be paying attention to that among one another. In the sense that, hey, you just diminished my enjoyment with your shtick there. So I think that's actually a reality, don't you? I mean, why do we have to have no standards at all just because, we're role playing and we're all friends and, blah, blah, blah. So to focus on that traumatic aspect, to focus on trauma is missing the range of what I'm talking about. I'm not saying the trauma issue is absent. I'm saying it's only one of the things that we should consider. And that we will find through time, whether as a group, or maybe we'll start that way, I can't tell. Maybe we'll find or discover that we have been doing this all along, that we would like to play far from the lines. Just maybe given the topic, maybe given the nature of the actual fiction itself. I'm just not real happy. I mean, I don't need to go onto any lines. I don't need to approach any lines for myself or others in this particular fiction. Or we may find that one or another of us really would like to kind of push it up over here, in which case the fiction becomes, some people might say darker, or some people might say deeper, or some people might say problematic, or some people might say more thematic, whatever. Or just more disgusting perhaps, but although I really think that's not really the main topic. But the deal is that we then have to assess and say, well, are we playing so that we continue near that line? Meg Baker actually talked about the ways that groups come to a fair understanding of this, and that she regards all of these as perfectly reasonable. And I don't think that she was advocating, and when I say don't think, I'm not speculating. I know she was not advocating, okay, everybody, all play little fluffy and nice, and let's do My Little Ponies, except without all the drama even. So no, she was not saying that. I know this for two reasons. One, I have played with Meg Baker, and she sits on lines happily all the time. So number one. Number two, that's not what she said. She very clearly said that what she called I Will Not Abandon You is a fine way to play, and no one gets hurt is a fine way to play, and that it's just clear, though, that they're very different things. You don't wiggle between them socially. These are ways that groups find themselves playing as they go. And I think that's a very reasonable observation. So I think there's a huge amount of room to talk about this and the different things that may be done. I do think that because it is a dynamic phenomenon in play, that we should be gentle with one another about finding these things. I mean, I've seen people in play, say something and then someone else says, are you sure? Or someone else says, the opposite. Well, I'm not so sure. Are you sure? In a more kind of, I don't really like it kind of way. And without it being a silencing, without it being a statement of, you're a bad person, you broke the law, I am now hurt and bleeding, shut up, which is what the X card is. You see, the X card assumes that there are toxic people at the table, and that there are victims at the table who are about to be hurt and bleed. Like that. I have played with severely disabled people. I have played with people of all preferences, of all the different human activities that you can imagine. I have played with all range of ages. And I'll say one thing: people who have relevant and completely justified cause for saying that they have experienced oppression or discrimination or injury or travails of daily life that they have to face that most of the rest of us don't. People who fit those, who can be described fairly in this way, they're tougher than the rest of us. They're not weaker than us. They are not fragile. These are tough people. And they can manage the boundaries of what they will and won't like, or manage the boundaries of others' understanding of it, which is hugely valuable. They can do that much better than you or me or lots and lots of other people. So, yes, there are lines and veils, but let's find them. Let's learn from one another. Let's look at this fiction we've made. And don't forget, too, it's not about winning an Oscar. This is going to evaporate when we're done. Even if we record it, the experience of doing it is gone. And that recording isn't product, it's documentary, but it's not product. So,
Correct.
therefore, if we don't do very well this time, maybe after the session, one of us says, I am really not happy with how that particular set of dialogue went, whether it was table talk or whether it was fiction talk. I'm not really happy about that at all. Well, either they talk to the other person, or maybe they did it themselves and they reflect upon it, or whatever. And the next time around is better. That is okay. We don't have to, be graded on this and be stamped with the abuser's stamp, at transgressions, as if we understand that we are all coming together and that we accept our social space as somewhere that we really would like to, preserve it as a social space, and we like our creativity in it. You will discover that there are self-assessments and sometimes conversations that, rather than being corrective, they are clarifying. Do you see the difference? Corrective means we have to
Yeah,
fix the broken thing, the thing you fucked up, you bad person. Clarifying says, no, we will continue and we are getting better at this. And yeah, you know what? That really wasn't that good. Hey, if you play music, if you've been in, any kind of artistic activity that it has this kind of rough cut quality, right? That isn't sanitized through production into a perfect form, you're going to have ups and downs in how good it is. The
of
idea
course.
is for the trajectory to be going up, right? So that if we make mistakes later, they're about more important things. Does that make sense? That's so,
Totally.
yeah,
Totally.
that's very much where I'm coming from about this. And I don't think I've ever said anything different. I'm not sure. Now, granted, we're talking 20 years, 20 plus years of dialogue. My views certainly may have swerved, or certainly may be specific to the games I'm playing at that moment. So I'm not saying you're going to find me repeating precisely the same words all the way through. But I don't think that I've ever been in the position of saying I think that role playing itself is a toxic space that needs to be, sanitized. It needs to be made, healthy. We need to turn this terrible place into a surgical theater, with germ-free fields. Um, Nor do we have to uh, think of it as a place where, the danger is always lurking. We have to, we have to smack the danger. We have to fix it now, when it appears. So, a couple of points. I'll give you two examples. Example number
Okay.
one: In a game I have played not too long ago, the character who was intended to show up by the person who was the game master for that game. And the character was intended to show up on a motorcycle, pop a bullet into the chest of the person that we're supposed to be bodyguarding, and then zoom off on the motorcycle. This was a railroaded event. Well, they were playing with the wrong table, and the idea that we did not get to actually put the combat mechanisms into operation was unacceptable to everybody there. So the person found that, no, they can't just have their NPCs show up, do a thing, and then vanish while we all just stand there. And so,
Of course.
well, I don't know about of course, but if you're playing at a table with me and most of the people I play with, you're not going to get away with that. You're like, pull out the fucking cards, initiative. And so, what happens is that we ended up actually defeating this person. And in fact, given that it was this cyberware, extensible sabers, kind of anime side of cyberpunk kind of situation, actually killed the person, which was a little bit of a shock to the GM, who actually had made up this NPC, that they liked and all the rest of it. But this happens. And then, interestingly enough, whether it was a defense mechanism or just because the person was feeling, disoriented or whatever, somebody said something about, that was a pretty nice jacket she was wearing. And it was kind of table talk. Nobody was actually talking about taking anything from this body. And a person at the table said something about, is she wearing, she's wearing leather pants too. And the sense of kind of a sickening drop that I experienced at that moment, and as it turned out, other people did too, the thought that our characters would strip a dead woman's body of her pants, the image of that in our fiction, it just grossed me out. It's you could say it offended me, and I wouldn't object. You could now, whether did it traumatize me? Did it bring up? Was it worth saying I have been injured? No, I don't think I was injured. I think I'm a little tougher than that. Okay, I don't think I'm going to I don't think I'm going to go need to know another therapy session or anything like that. But I didn't want it in the fiction. And so whether this got addressed like in dialogue between then and the next session or not, because remember, it remains table talk. There was no fictional activity involved in this part of play, this exchange of words during play. There was no fictional activity. So there was no, I do this happens, none of that. So it was all just table talk. But still, it was the kind of table talk that I don't really think I need or want. I really don't want it. So it was adolescent. So therefore, for whatever reason, and we did not have a great big, all right, everybody, we need a serious talk. Everybody, share one painful thing about yourselves, and then we'll talk about this. None of that. Nothing like that. But that didn't happen again. It may have been that one person and the person who spoke talked a little bit between or not. I know the person in question very well, and that person is very self-reflective. And even if nobody had talked with him, that's possible that nobody talked with him and he just said, oh my God, what am I saying? Right. So I don't even really know the social mechanism by which this didn't happen again. But it did.
Okay.
And that's okay, right? So
you didn't specifically say anything.
No, at the time I didn't.
It just happened that
I'm not always as alert as I should be. And second, maybe it wasn't all that necessary. I'm not the daddy of the group after all. I refuse to play that.
Of course.
Under any circumstances. So so that's what I'm saying. I mean, that's an example, though. I think we did hit a line and went over right? There's a difference between being at a line and going over it. I think he went over a line. And for whatever reason, I mean, if that, let's say he did it twice in the next session, that's when we would be saying, dude, you're really hitting the point where I would say, I don't want to play with you. So do you see but that didn't happen. And so there's room to be a little gentle about it. You don't have to have a big confrontation in the moment. You don't have to have a big encounter group in between. There's room depending on the people. And depending on, I don't have the perfect formula. When this happens, do this. I said I had 2 examples, and now I'm trying to think of the other one. Oh, stupid mind. Well, maybe that's enough examples. Okay. So what else did you have in mind? What would you like to talk about?
First of all, how much time do you have left?
Oh, me?
Yeah.
Well, I should warn you, it's kind of like Fidel Castro. He says, I'm going to speak for an hour, and then, and 2 hours later, the women in the crowd say, Fidel, we have children to feed. That actually happened, by the way.
Okay. So we can go on. It's fine. It's fine for me. But just I don't want to steal your time too much. Mm-hmm. Good. Anyways, you already went through 3 or 4 of the next questions, so that's very good of you.